Hi, I'm Jeremy Crosby.
And I'm Nick Boucher. We're the hosts for the program that's all about your city, Talking Fitchburg.
Every day, we pull together the news, events, and information you need to stay on top of what's happening in the city of Fitchburg.
Find Talking Fitchburg on cable TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and our live stream on the web. Plus, you can view all our headlines and stories on Facebook, YouTube, and our video on demand service. This is your city.
Keep up with Talking Fitchburg and the issues that affect you and your neighbors.
Want to know what's happening in your city? Get Notify Me messages from the City of Fitchburg. Visit fitchburgwi.gov on your computer or mobile device and select the big Notify Me button on the left. Enter your email and/or phone number, whichever is best for you to get notifications. Scroll down the list and select all the topics you're interested in to receive email or text messages about. You'll be notified every time one of your topics is updated. Sign up for Notify Me, one more way to keep up with your Fitchburg government.
The meeting of the Committee of the Whole on January 22nd, 2025 at 6:31 p.m. First item is a Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item is the roll call. Administrator?
Good evening. You'd mentioned Alder Allen is delayed. Mayor Arata Frada is absent with excuse. Alder Dantzler is also absent with excuse. Alder Gerhardt.
Here.
Alder Herbst. Alder Jetzer.
Here.
Alder Maldonado.
Here.
Alder Vafadari.
Here.
Alder Wheeler.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Wonderful. Next item is the approval of minutes. I'll need a motion on the November 20th, 2024 Committee of the Whole minutes.
I move approval.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Second that motion.
Great. Alder Jetzer and Alder Maldonado. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next item is public appearances for non-agenda items. We have one member of the public. David Haight, please join us at the mic. You have 3 minutes.
So last night at the Plan Commission, I talked about the legal significance of the fact that the state statute that establishes the comprehensive plan says the comprehensive plan adopted by an ordinance does not make it a regulation. And so that was put in, an amendment was put in 2010. The comprehensive plans became effective right around 2010. There was some confusion as to whether cities still needed to adopt a comprehensive zoning ordinance in addition to the comprehensive plan or not. And there were other things that cities were trying to do by putting things in the plan and then calling them ordinances. So that clause was put in specifically to prevent a city from putting something in the comprehensive plan and then asserting that it has any force of law. A regulation is the most generic term for anything that has the force of law. So the Supreme Court has said, Wisconsin Supreme Court says that the council legislates two ways, ordinances and resolutions. And then there's also the procedural rules that council can adopt for itself, Plan Commission can adopt for itself. It cannot be any of those. So the net result is if the only place those procedures are is in the comprehensive plan, they don't exist legally. That means that there is no procedure for amending the comprehensive plan, major, minor, or otherwise. And then the other issue is what constitutes a comprehensive plan? Well, there's a statement, the very first statement in 66-101 says a comprehensive plan is a plan for a city, blah, 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 that is a master plan adopted under 6223 by the Plan Commission. Why is that there? What does that? In 1977, the Wisconsin Supreme Court issued a ruling that said that cities didn't have to adopt the master plan in order to adopt a comprehensive zoning ordinance. They could adopt essentially a naked comprehensive zoning ordinance. And to differentiate it from a master plan, they called it the comprehensive plan. So there are lots of cities around the state that already had a comprehensive plan. So the state legislature decided they had to make sure that the legal definition was exceptionally clear, that there wasn't a confusion about these naked comprehensive zoning ordinances qualifying somehow as a comprehensive plan under the new law. So that's a definitional statement right there. A comprehensive plan to be eligible to be adopted as the city's comprehensive plan through the enactment of an ordinance by the Common Council must and can only be a master plan adopted by the Plan Commission. And it doesn't say an amendment adopted by the Plan Commission. It says a master plan. So the way this works, the master plan that has existed since 1941 still exists as a legal document.
That's your time, David. And please stay there. We'll keep you for the next item. Thank you. Moving on. Well, so we have no other members of the public in chambers or online, so we can move on to item 6, agenda items. 6A, presentation and discussion on total maximum daily loads, TMDL, with our environmental project engineer, Ben Schulte. And we'll go ahead and start with our public comment. And David Haight, you have 3 minutes.
So I don't have I have the presentation, I've seen it, but I don't know what the verbiage is. But I just want to qualify some things and give you some additional information. So amongst the things that are implicated, so both Swan and Murphy's Creeks became impaired for phosphorus after the TMDL was created. What does that mean? Well, in large part, the total phosphorus percent reduction that's assigned to a city is related to the degree of impairment there are in impaired streams, rivers. And since these two became impaired after the TMDL was created, that means that there's obligation for the city to reduce the TP more than is listed in the plan, because the plan needs to be amended to account for the fact that after the plan was created, the city incurred more, shall we say, TP debt by those two streams going impaired. Okay, so the second thing is that the TMDL and WINS were created in 2012. The way that these things work is that the Clean Water Act says you get an MS4 permit in 4-year cycles. Every 4-year cycle from the beginning of the TMDL for which you have a stake in, you have to show more and more and more progress. And as time goes on and you show no progress, then the hammer starts to come down. So we're about to go into the 4th cycle of a 4-year MS4 real soon now. And as far as I understand, this is the first time that the city is trying to address the TMDL and the adaptive management. So that's an issue. So the other thing is that the Clean Water Act doesn't require that you meet the allocation of the TMDL reductions. That's not what the Clean Water Act says. The Clean Water Act says you will do whatever it takes. You will spend as much money as it takes to get every stream and every water body to meet its water quality standard. So just meeting the reductions without having the streams themselves meet the water quality standards doesn't mean you're done. It means you're started. You have to do, in the end, whatever it takes. And so it gets to the final thing here, which is that, so when we, as a city, tell developers they can design stormwater facilities however they want, and then they deed them over to the city, and they've built them to minimum spec, if that, what happens is the city becomes responsible. So when you look at these maps, you see the effect of that, what's happening. Basically, you're allowing the developers, the city's allowing the developers to basically build minimal things that don't even necessarily meet specification, because our stormwater ordinance doesn't call for NR 103 compliance. It doesn't call for Dan County Water Quality Plan compliance.
David, that's your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And joining us tonight is also our chair of the Resource Conservation Commission, Ron French. Would you like to speak at all?
No, I'm just here, chairman of the Resource Conservation Commission, just to listen to Dan and answer any questions that may come up.
Great. Ron's just here to listen and answer any questions that come up. Thank you so much, Ron. Ben, I'll turn over to you.
All right, well, great. We got the slide up. Okay. Let's see here. I don't think you guys want to see that view. All right, that looks much better here. All right, well, thanks for having me. Again, I'm Ben Schulte, one of the environmental engineers here with the city. And today I'm here to kind of talk about the city's recent effort to update our water quality model in the urban service area of the city of Fitchburg, where there are TMDLs that apply. So today we're going to kind of just talk through about at a high level, what is a TMDL, things of that nature, why it's so important. So I would say this is a very important document that's been developed for the stormwater utility. It can be used to inform future decisions. And it's really a big effort to put something like this together. So I did want to highlight it and kind of give everyone a chance to take a look at this and see what this all means for the city. So again, we'll get into it. There's going to be a lot of acronyms here, like TMDL, WinSlam. Don't expect that everyone knows what that is. And I guess, by the way, if there are any questions, I do have some time at the end, but if I'm not making sense or if anyone needs some clarification on something, please feel free to just, interrupt and ask your question, and we'll try to get it answered. Back on track here, so we'll talk a little bit more about the background of the TMDLs, how it fits in to the city's permit requirements. We'll take a look at the actual effort to update our stormwater quality model and all the work that was done. We'll take a look at some future BMPs that were analyzed as a part of this effort, and then get into some recommendations, implementations for the future. And then finally, we'll end with a chance for some additional questions. All right, so first, what is a TMDL? Well, it's an acronym, Total Maximum Daily Load. It's developed for impaired water bodies. Here in Wisconsin, it's developed and implemented by the DNR. And it essentially places a limit on the amount of pollution that can be discharged to an impaired water body. So another way of saying the same thing is the amount of pollutant a water body can receive and still meet the water quality standard. And of course, there's portions within Fitchburg that are within the Rock River Basin TMDL. So that's there's multiple TMDLs throughout the state. For Fitchburg, it's the Rock River TMDL that our watersheds are a part of. And then here I just added this little photo. So back in July 2011, there's this large document developed. This is basically the TMDL document where it outlines everything you need to know about the Rock River TMDL. So again, that was approved by the EPA in 2011. They approved the TMDL, but then that authority for development and implementation is it's essentially the DNR that's responsible for that. So again, like I said, the DNR is responsible for development and implementation of TMDLs. You maybe saw on the last slide here that this specifically says total phosphorus and total suspended solids. So those are the two pollutants of concern in the reach sheds in Fitchburg. So that's what we're going to be talking about here. Total phosphorus and total suspended solids, which suspended solids, that's think about some silt particles or some clay particles, something like that, basically sediment, you could think of it as. So That other document on the previous page, that outlines all of the target reductions. Basically, the EPA contracts with a consultant. They do some complex computer modeling of the watershed. They figure out, all right, how many pounds or tons of phosphorus and total suspended solids can be discharged into these water bodies while still maintaining, the intended function of that water body. And being that the DNR is ultimately responsible for implementation, those required reductions are right inside the city of Fitchburg's WIPD's permit. So that's the Wisconsin Pollution Discharge Elimination Permit. They're 5-year terms. And this is basically, following the compliance and all the outlined requirements in this document is essentially what allows the Fitchburg as a MS4 community or municipal separate storm sewer system community to discharge water, to discharge stormwater more specifically. So again, you can see I highlighted a few of these rows here. I'm noticing that it is way too small to read, but there are 3 reach sheds in Fitchburg that eventually are going to have to be in compliance with the TMDL. So when I say reach shed, if we go back and we think about the Rock River, the whole Rock River watershed, it's huge. It's thousands and thousands of acres. You can keep breaking that down and kind of getting smaller and smaller watersheds. So, for example, a watershed that drains to Swan Creek, that's a separate reach shed. Nine Springs Creek, that's a separate reach shed within the TMDL. And these 2 columns here on the slideshow basically outline the required TSS and total phosphorus reductions from no control. So when they do their big, complex computer model initially, they're looking at, all right, so, assuming existing conditions, how many pounds or tons of phosphorus or total suspended solids are entering this water body? How much does that have to be reduced by to maintain the water quality standards? So again, here there's 3 in the urban service area of Fitchburg, and the required reductions range from about 62% to 70% for TSS, 73% for TSS, and they range from about 54 to 63% for total phosphorus. There's not necessarily a fixed schedule for meeting these TMDL reductions through city and private infrastructure, but it is expected that continuous progress should be made, likely over multiple permit terms. I guess I'll spoil it a little bit here. Out of the 3, 2 of them through modeling are not shown to be in compliance. So luckily, the DNR offers multiple different compliance tracks. The city's not in trouble with the EPA or the DNR or anything like that for not meeting their TMDL reductions. And that's because the city is able to participate in a program. It's called an adaptive management program. It's a program that has to be approved by the DNR. In here, it's called Yahara Wins. Maybe you recall some resolutions coming across, outlining the contribution schedule for Fitchburg. So since 2012, the city of Fitchburg's been contributing about $100,000 a year to Yahara Wins, and what they do is go around all throughout, Dane County, and they'll work with landowners, primarily farmers, to implement some, better practices for controlling sediment and runoff from farms. So that could be things like buffers or grassed waterways, things of that nature. And the reason why Fitchburg and
I think every other MS4 municipality that has the opportunity to in Dane County contributes to this, is because it's way cheaper to reduce TSS loads and phosphorus loads from farmland than it is from, urban runoff. So from getting the best bang for your buck, installing a grass waterway is going to be much cheaper than, digging up a road and putting in giant pipes. So that's one method that is very popular in Dane County that the city contributes to maintain compliance. Now, of course, like I said, there isn't a deadline for Yahara winds. I mean, it's probably going to go on for decades, but of course, I think it goes without saying it's desirable if the city could meet the TMDL compliance and, on their own with their own infrastructure, private infrastructure, and, not have to continue paying into this adaptive management program. So getting into what this project actually was and what we did, essentially we used some computer software. City contracted with AECom to do a lot of this work. They used a software called WinSlam. The DNR actually has some pretty prescriptive guidance on how they want you to do all these calculations and do all this reporting. So we followed that, and essentially we ended up looking at about 7,000 acres of the city. There's certain reasons why you can not model certain types of land uses. For instance, land owned by the state, you don't have to model it, you can take it out. So after doing that, we got down to about just under 5,000 acres that we actually modeled. Over 180 best management practices, so BMPs, that's things like an infiltration basin or a wet pond. Many of these are owned by the city or the City of Fitchburg Stormwater Utility. There's a lot of other ones that are actually privately owned, so that was kind of a new thing that the city hadn't done in any of their modeling efforts previously, was including these privately owned practices. And in order to do that, the city needs to have a maintenance agreement to ensure that those BMPs are going to we're going to function as they were intended to. And then, of course, we also would need kind of as-built information, right? We can't just make these assumptions that, this pond is, 1 acre big and, a foot deep. So we actually have to have survey information to get these private BMPs into the model. We also include things like street sweeping, cleaning out sumps, and then now starting in 2025, we can take credit for leaf collection. And that's because we now have 3 leaf collections in the fall. So that's a DNR requirement. Once you get up to 3 fall leaf collections, you can get some extra credit for the TMDL reductions. And we got this table here. Again, might not be able to make out all the numbers, but I'll just briefly explain what some of this stuff is and how this ties into the modeling effort that was completed. Essentially 2 different models were developed. You had one model where we say, all right, we don't have any BMPs at all. We just, what's the total amount of TSS and TP running off the land if we didn't have any wet ponds or anything like that? So we've got this TSS and TP columns and this no controls column. So you can say, let's say Lake Wingra, if there weren't any BMPs, the model indicates that there's 27 tons of TSS running off annually, right? So that's kind of the no controls model. Then there's the with controls model. So that's when we throw in all the BMPs, we route all the water through the various basins, and it spits out some new numbers for TSS and TP reduction. So again, using Lake Wingra as the example, without any controls, it was 27. Added in the BMPs, street cleaning, all those things, and it's down to 13. So that's, represents a 53% reduction. And there's, this percent reduction shown for each of the 3 reach sheds in the city of Fitchburg urban service area. Again, that's Lake Wingra, Nine Springs Creek, and Swan Creek. Again, same with TP here. We've got these no controls, with controls, and then what the percent reduction is. So how well are these BMPs working? What does the model actually say they're doing? And then there's also this column. It's the TMDL target reduction column. So on one of the previous slides, I had that table highlighted. It had those percentages in there. These are the same percentages from the WIPD's permit. So these are basically the goal reductions. So based on this modeling, you can see that 2 out of the 3 reach sheds are clearly not in compliance with the required reduction, whereas Swan Creek, per the model, is actually in compliance with these percentages. Now there is a little nuance there since we actually have a gauge there, so we know what the concentration of phosphorus is in the stream. It gets tested. The water quality standard for Wisconsin for any stream is 0.075 milligrams per liter of total phosphorus. I don't think we've ever recorded total phosphorus that low. So, that's kind of where there's a discrepancy. In theory, if we were getting all of these reductions, and of course there's other areas contributing to Swan Creek other than just what was modeled in here. So it's not quite apples to apples, but you would expect maybe a little bit closer to that 0.075 milligram per liter. So that's something that we'll have to get sorted out, because obviously it's one thing to say, yeah, we modeled it, we're fine, but what really matters is what the water quality in the creek is based on testing. And that's Swan Creek, of course, with Nine Springs and Lake Wingra. We're a little bit a ways away from those target reductions. Why is that? Well, much of those areas were just built before there were the stringent stormwater standards that there are today. So Swan Creek, a lot of that has developed more recently, right? So, there's not really any developments in there that didn't have some kind of a water quality component with their project, whereas, you go up into, off certain places off Fish Hatch, or in that Lake Wingra watershed, a lot of that stuff might have been built before there were the stormwater standards there are today. So just because it's older, we didn't get the opportunity to get those BMPs put in when all of that was being developed. So, that's really the driver as to why these areas that developed, much earlier primarily are, still a ways off from reaching these target reductions. And here's just a few graphs, or I guess maps, I should say, GIS maps that were developed as part of this project. It's just kind of a good visual to look at, what do I mean when I say the no controls model versus the with control model. So you can see, I guess that would be on your left. These are identical, images as far as the area being analyzed, but you look over on the right, you see a lot more green compared to the yellow, the orange, and the red. Basically, green means that there's lower TSS, being discharged from that land area. Whereas when you get into the yellows, the oranges, and the reds, that means there's a pretty high TSS load from that area. So again, if we didn't have any BMPs in the city, you'd be looking at, there's a lot more red, orange, yellow. You add those in, it gets a lot more green, but you can still kind of see the hot spots, if you will, where we know there's still a lot of TSS being generated. And again, here, this is the same thing, except it's phosphorus now rather than TSS. And you know, the hot spots for TSS are also going to be the hot spots for the total phosphorus. But again, that's just kind of I think, a neat visualization that was developed as part of this. So one other important piece of this project was looking at some potential future BMPs. So we ended up analyzing 10 potential future BMPs. We had a little list of criteria to determine how we picked these ones out. One of the main criteria was we only wanted to look at projects on parcels currently owned by the city, so none of these would involve purchasing land. And we wanted to focus on Nine Springs Creek because that's by far the largest reach shed here, and really is going to need the most money spent in this area to get to compliance. So if we did all 10 of those projects, it cost a hair under $5 million estimated construction cost, and the results they weren't great. Pretty modest reductions. So you think you spend $5 million, you're going to start making a big dent. Not so much. So, we're looking at, going from 21% to 18% for phosphorus, and for total suspended solids, we're going from 16% to 12% off. So, that's, you wish you'd see some bigger reductions after a $5 million investment. But, I think that clearly just kind of goes to show that, certainly stormwater projects aimed at improving water quality are going to be important for the city to implement Nine Springs Creek going forward. And, BMP construction alone is not going to be the whole story here. There's going to have to be some other factors that help us out. So what are the next steps? Well, one, I had mentioned that we can take credit for privately owned BMPs. We have taken credit for as many as we can right now. There are still several out there that would be worthwhile getting into this model. It's just a matter of securing those as-builts and securing the maintenance agreements. If we don't have those two things, we can't include it in the model. So that's something that we're actively pursuing, making sure that these private property owners with BMPs are aware that there's a credit available for them. So, if they send us the as-built and maintenance agreement, we can get it in the city model, but they can also get a credit on their stormwater utility charges. Certainly new BMP construction will play a part in reaching TMDL compliance. Fortunately, there are many grant opportunities available through the county and the DNR to offset some of those costs. Another piece that could play a big role is just redevelopment. So Fitchburg is, has a pretty stringent TSS reduction for redevelopment. It's 80% is the requirement, whereas, in most of Dane County, that's actually 40%. So having that 80% TSS reduction requirement is going to take these properties that are, not getting any treatment and kind of, detracting from Fitchburg's total numbers, and it's actually going to kind of flip the script, and it'll be, an asset to the city from a water quality perspective. So certainly redevelopment projects throughout the watershed could potentially have a big impact. Road reconstruction. Anytime you've got a contractor already mobilized, there's some efficiencies and cost savings that can be realized if you incorporate, maybe a stormwater project with road reconstruction. So certainly an option would be to kind of go above and beyond when we have an opportunity to go and do that and get some good reductions for a reasonable price point. That could be a very attractive option as well. And then there's emerging technologies. So it might not be just a matter of, your classic wet ponds. There's other things that the Wisconsin Standard Oversight Committee are currently looking at, such as iron filings that can be added into infiltration basins. Phosphorus will bind to that. Things like alum injections in wet ponds, that's something that has been used fairly extensively outside of Wisconsin, but we haven't seen that much in Wisconsin. That's basically an injection of a chemical that causes phosphorus to kind of flocculate and settle all out to the bottom. And certainly just keeping our eyes and ears open to any other type of emerging technologies that offer TSS and TEP reduction at a more attractive price point. And then, I threw this one on here. It's something to consider again, just with the idea of trying to keep all options open, but perhaps there's some private land that goes up for sale, and it would be an ideal spot to build a cost-effective BMP. That's another option, probably not the ideal thing from a cost perspective, but certainly at this point, all of these things are really need to be considered. So with that, I guess I'll just open it up to questions here. And we have Rick Eilertson with AECom also on here. So as I mentioned, the city contracted with AECom to work on this. And certainly he'll be available if there's any questions I can't answer.
Thanks so much, Ben. We can go ahead and do questions. I'll start with Dave, and then we'll do Bill.
Jamestown, and we're in the Sugar River watershed, which ultimately flows into the Rock River, but is that governed by the same as the Yahara watershed is my first question.
Yeah, so I don't believe the Sugar River does flow into the Rock River. As far as if there's any, talk about TMDL development for the Sugar River Basin, I don't know that, Rick. Perhaps maybe you have some insight if there's been any discussion for TMDL development for the Sugar River Basin.
Right. Yeah. So, and Dave, I guess I'm not sure. It's possible that Sugar River combines with Rock River when it gets down in Illinois, but not within Wisconsin. And so Wisconsin DNR currently doesn't have a TMDL for the Sugar River, which Badger Mill Creek is part of. So Jamestown is part of the Badger Mill Creek watershed. DNR has been making, has talked about, they've been talking with primarily the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District because they previously, or I guess still currently have the effluent discharge going into the Badger Mill Creek, which is part of the Sugar River. So now one of the things just for permit requirements, the district is looking to try to pull that effluent return out of the Badger Mill Creek, so they only have one spot to discharge and they don't have to worry about permit requirements going into the Sugar River. I think that a TMDL will likely be developed at some point, but it's going to be at least 5 years out. So I would say, maybe within 10 years, there will be a TMDL developed for Badger Mill Creek, and then we'll need to do something similar to the Badger Mill Creek watershed of Fitchburg. But one of the benefits is that that was developed, most of Badger Mill Creek was developed post the current standard, some of the current standards, and so the city is in a much better shape for the Badger Mill Creek. And when Verona Road was expanded, the DOT was able to work with City of Fitchburg to get improvements for those different stormwater facilities that DOT was discharging to. So there's some really good stories to tell about what the city and DOT accomplished with some of those stormwater improvements just with the last Verona Road extension or expansion.
Thank you. Second question. I've spent a fair amount of time working with aerobic digesters on dairy farms, and I was under the impression that the phosphorus stays with the solids. Am I correct on that, Rick and Ben? Am I correct with that? I'm not sure I am, but it seems like someone told me.
My understanding is if you look at kind of your typical stormwater sample, and you see, okay, how much total phosphorus is in there, about half of it will be particulate phosphorus, and about the other half will be actually dissolved phosphorus. Now, of course, but that percentage dissolved to particulate is going to be dependent on the source area. So, there may be a source area that is going to be more, a little heavier on the dissolved versus particulate, or the other way around. But my understanding is it's, roughly 50-50 particulate dissolved.
Okay, so our settling, our wet bottom basin should do a pretty good job with half of it. If it comes in, it should settle there eventually. We dredge it out. One more question. And, in the past, there's been talk, MMSD doing phosphorus removal, and it's crazy expensive. Maybe, I don't know if you or Rick have a sense of, we probably could spend 1/10 or 1/20th the amount with some other things versus what we'd be paying if we were asking MMSD to do phosphorus removal from the effluent that flows there. I don't know if you can speak to that.
And just to clarify, MMSD for those watching is the sewer district and not the school district. So the sewers.
That is a great clarification.
Yes.
Thank you, Gabriella.
Yeah, so that's a great question. From the wastewater treatment plant perspective, certainly those kind of upgrades are expensive. And that MMSD is really kind of the entity that I'll say leads Yahara wins. So they're using that adaptive management plan to maintain compliance, just as the city of Fitchburg is, because that is a more cost-effective way to achieve compliance versus some of those costly system upgrades. And I don't know, Rick, maybe you have something else to add?
Yeah, so when the district did a study to do, some really expansive, some heavy duty brick and mortar improvements at the treatment plant to basically require like a reverse osmosis system to really pull that dissolved reactive phosphorus, the dissolved phosphorus, out of that component, because that's what the district is concerned about, or the DNR is concerned about, with the effluent return being put into back right now into both Badger Mill Creek and Badfish Creek. The bulk of the component of the phosphorus that's in that is that dissolved reactive phosphorus, because the settling's already taken care of. They've in the bulk of the almost pretty much all of the particulate phosphorus is glommed into the solids, the biosolids that the district is land applying primarily on egg fields throughout the county and adjacent counties. Some of the research that I remember seeing the district and others doing about 10 years ago was that brick and mortar improvements and also like stormwater BMPs, stormwater best practices would if it was the most cost effective ones were costing about $1,000 per pound of total phosphorus, whereas one of the benefits of the adaptive management program is that by putting improvements in the agricultural environment, those practices were costing about $100, maybe, or a little bit more. Sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. But right about $100 per total pound of phosphorus removed from the going downstream. And so that's one of the things that's made the adaptive management program, the Yahar Winds program that Ben mentioned, so successful, is that it's a lot more cost effective to do those improvements in the agricultural environment than it is in either the stormwater BMP practices within communities, and also similarly with continued brick and mortar improvements at the district plant at the Nine Springs Valley, or the Nine Springs treatment plant.
Thank you. Why are we focused on phosphorus and I don't see nitrogen discussed, and I think that makes the blooms are you see farmers put in drain tile when it rains. If you measure that effluent, as soon as rains and it's coming out of that drain tile, the nitrogen is on its way out to the river.
So the two pollutants of concern that were identified with the Rock River total maximum daily load were total suspended solids, which the city was already reporting on, when that came out in 2011. The bigger new pollutant of concern that was identified by DNR was total phosphorus. Total nitrogen wasn't included. Those were the only two pollutants of concern that were identified with that 2011 study. I think it's going to be a while before DNR does anything, adds any more pollutants of concern within the Rock River. They're going to really, most of the improvements, the last 10 plus years have been working on trying to get sediment and phosphorus out. And, there is some benefit, there's some co-benefits, those are, anything that you're doing to get the total suspended solids and total phosphorus out is likely pulling other contaminants with it. And then wherever that goes, whether it's in the bottom of the pond and then gets dredged out and taken care of properly, or, pulled out at the treatment plant, and then addressed responsibly. That's also taking other pollutants of concern out for the basically for the ride.
Bill.
So the no controls total amount, is that the amount? Is that like the total amount coming off that land, or the total amount in excess of pre-development time for that land?
So the total controls, the no controls model would be let's say it's the existing land use, everything is what it is now, except there's no BMPs. So it's all based on, the parking lots, it's based on the existing conditions minus the BMPs.
Okay, so it's not trying to take the existing conditions and subtract what Mother Nature had 150 years ago or something like that.
No.
Okay. And so we talked about the adaptive management program and everything. So 36 square miles is 23,000 whatever acres. We're only modeling 5,000. In terms of total runoff or total pollutant, total amount of the pollution, how much of that do you think is coming from within the urban service area versus without the urban service area?
That's a good question. Certainly the urban service area, if you just look geographically, is maybe here we'll say that what is outlined in red is more or less the urban service area here. What is that, like a third, a quarter of the?
It's like 10 square miles
something like
or something,
that.
Yeah.
So certainly I would say that there's more pollutants being discharged from the non-study area just due to the difference in land area. I think it would also be fair to say that agricultural practices generally are going to have at least higher TP runoff than, say, a parking lot. So certainly there's very significant amounts, being discharged from these areas outside of the study area. We didn't include all of, these other areas because, well, the city doesn't really it hasn't developed. There's nothing there's no BMPs to put in the model, essentially.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just wondering, compared with, hundreds of years ago, before modern fertilizers and plowing came along, I imagine
I'm sure,
suspended solids were far
a prairie
less.
is going to have, very, very little. A nice, well-vegetated, prairie like it would have been, pre-settlement. Certainly, there's going to be far less, running off if it's well-vegetated.
Okay. In the southeast corner of Lacey and Sain, there was a big red square, even on the after the BMPs were taken into account. Is that going to be addressed by the Hartung Fields development there?
Yes, it will. So when we put this model together, those improvements were not accepted by the city, right? So we can't just say, oh yeah, this is what it's going to be, trust us. They've got to be built, they've got to be accepted, they've got to be, really done before we can start taking credit. So that's, and this is going to be a living model, a living document for the city as things like Hartung develop. We'll be able to go in, add those BMPs, rerun the model, and get some new figures. But yeah, certainly if those Hartung BMPs, that right now there's 2 large wet ponds and 2 infiltration basins. If those were added in there, it would not be the color that it is on this map now.
Okay, and then finally, I think you said that all new development in Fitchburg requires an 80% reduction over the no controls amounts, but the rest of Dane County is at about 40%. But the requirements are greater than 40%. So how does that work?
So for new development, everywhere it's 80%. It's redevelopment where the city's at 80%, but there's a lot of other communities at 40%. You get into some other communities like up in, Appleton, Fox Valley area. They actually, have some slightly different requirements where they'll say you have to meet this TP percentage based on their TMDL, but if you get 80% TSS reduction, you're going to be doing all right with the TP as well.
And I'll add on one more question. I know we have some road redevelopments happening next year, or I guess this year. Sorry, 2025. How closely do you work? Are there opportunities that are being taken advantage of, given the road reconstruction in Sain Road and Fitrona, that could improve some of these models? Yeah,
so it's always tough with the road reconstructions. Obviously, there is the opportunity, which is why I put it on the slide and mentioned it. I'll say Sain, for example, we added a lot of sumped inlets, right? So annually, we'll have the vac truck out to suck out all the, sediment and debris, whatnot, out of all those sumps. So there's a pretty extensive sump system. There is also a new wet pond that is being constructed as part of that project. And for Fitrona Road, again, we actually have some, sumps are incorporated into that project, and there's also going to be some large, I'll call them like an oversized concrete pipe that's half full of water all the time. It's like an underground wet pond, basically. So yeah, we are incorporating those practices in both those upcoming reconstruction projects.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I don't see any other hands.
I have I have a couple of questions if I could jump in.
Yeah, Jay, we'll try to wrap up in 6 minutes, but thanks. You can jump in.
Yes. Well, I just pulled in the parking lot too, so this is exciting. Anyhow, back when we did the North Magaw neighborhood plan, we had instituted a 300-foot wetland buffer around Murphy Creek. And I think we also instituted that around some of the other wetlands. Is that still in place?
Yeah, so for the Magaw Park neighborhood plan, I can say, part of the CARPC resolution and also just in the city's neighborhood plan, it did discuss the 300-foot buffers. That did come to fruition again with the Hartung development over on the east side of that development where there's wetlands adjacent Swan Creek. There's that they did maintain that 300+ foot buffer area, and that is something that we look at when these developments come through.
All right, and is that wetland buffer being included in the Hartung property analysis at this point?
It is not, just because it was not built by the while we were doing this modeling effort. Again, even though we knew it was going to get built, it has to be built before we can take credit.
Gotcha. Okay, now the other question I wanted to answer earlier on, you were mentioning some other ways to reduce the phosphorus. By the way, Dave, I think the reason that they don't look at nitrogen so much is because nitrogen's in the air. And so the plants can just pull that right out of the air, but they can't pull the phosphorus out. So if we really want to control the algae blooms, the phosphorus is the thing to do. You had mentioned that we could use iron filings and some other things to precipitate out more of the phosphorus within our stormwater ponds. If we do that, I have two questions. One is, does that increase the amount of dredging that we have to do over time? Does that increase the frequency? And how do iron filings and whatever else we might use, how does that affect the wildlife, the fish and the birds that might be living in those ponds?
Yes, that is an excellent question. And again, both those things are currently being looked into by the Wisconsin Standards Oversight Committee. So with your typical best management practices throughout the city, there's going to be a DNR technical guideline associated with it. So they basically, even for a wet pond, it should be this, it should be, these dimensions, this deep. And that's what, we follow for any publicly owned BMP. And we would follow the technical guidance DNR provides for iron filings or any other kind of emerging technologies that the DNR does eventually develop guidelines for. But to get to your question about dredging, for the iron filings, that's something that would be mixed in more of like an infiltration basin or a bioretention basin. So something that wouldn't be dredged, but certainly. After a certain number of years, those iron filings are not going to be able to take any more phosphorus. They're going to be loaded up, and that's kind of the stuff that I would like to get direction from the DNR, so we can make good decisions. Of course, if they work great for phosphorus, but you have to dig it out and put new stuff in every year. Maybe there's a better option. If it lasts for 20 years, then, that's great. And maybe it's really cost effective. So certainly those are all things that would need to be considered. And then as far as the effects on wildlife, I'm not aware of anything notable for the iron filings. Again, if this was something the city were to seriously look into implementing, we would do the due diligence there. And as far as alum injections, that is something you inject into a wet pond. And yeah, there are concerns. if it's not done properly, if too much alum is put in, if the pH of the water is, not what it's supposed to be. All those things need to be taken into account. Rick, maybe you have something to add on to the kind of safety and potential not desirable effects of those two items.
Yeah, no, I think your responses, Ben, are right on track with exactly what I was going to say. Iron filings. Iron filings is also used, or can also be used in like concrete pavement, pervious concrete pavement. But it's basically below the ground surface. It's not going to be likely to mobilize into the environment. It just that it only has a certain useful lifetime period. That it can be, that it's doing its job, and the alum, like Ben mentioned, that would be used in wet pond areas. So then, it just helps to precipitate that flocculant, down and drop that out. So that would require more often dredging of that wet pond, and then making sure that the dredged material is taken care of responsibly. DNR does have requirements on the different types of reagents that you put within, so we need to follow that. And they're actually in the process, I believe, of a standards oversight committee for alum and other types of flocculant agents that get applied to stormwater facilities. So there's still a lot that the state is learning about that. But I think, like Ben said, it's good to keep those items in mind and make sure that we're following what the current best practices and basically updating what our best practices are going forward.
One more quick question, but
one thing I know Gabrielle is trying to wrap up, but I want to just say one thing that's really unique about this particular project is that's different from the way other communities have done that. We're able to basically work with Ben and Andrea at the city, where we actually helped to train them. Ben already knew Windslam quite well, and so this will be a really big benefit to the city going forward by having Ben and Andrea and possibly other staff actually know how to make these updates. So as new developments come in, they can actually just plug and chug this right into the citywide model and be able to spit out updates and then be able to take credit for that with the Madison Metropolitan Sewage District during that Yahar Winds adaptive management payments, those annual payments that go in. So I think that's one of the, Ben probably didn't want to mention that, but that's a real benefit to having city staff knowledgeable enough to be able to run these pretty technical models and make those updates. So just wanted to give a plug in for that.
That's outstanding. Thanks for sharing that, Rick. Quick question and quick answer.
One other quick question to just piggyback on the last one. So I know a lot of the phosphorus recovery that's done at MMSD goes out in basically to farm fields to become part of the new corn that we grow. When we dredge the ponds, does the same thing happen with that? And then if we're using alum in the ponds or in the other stormwater infrastructure to precipitate that phosphorus out, can that still be used in that same way, or does that present a different issue with the farm fields?
Sure. So as far as dredging post alum injection and removing the phosphorus and flocculant that way, and land spreading that on agricultural fields, I'll have to look into that. I don't know of any cases where that's been done. But just for your standard, dredging project that you're doing every 20, 30 years, certainly that is an option. Of course, you would maybe want to test for a few more different things, like, is there any PFAS? Is there, what is the phosphorus content, the nitrogen content? There's, make sure there's not any heavy metals or things of that nature. But assuming that all checks out, certainly it can be used as basically a soil amendment in agricultural lands, and that's actually something that I've been just starting to work with the county on, as there are some good case studies of reusing that dredged material for beneficial use. But yeah, great question.
Thank you so much, Ben. Appreciate the presentation. Thank you, Rick, for joining us. Appreciate the extra insight that you could provide. Rick used to be a stormwater engineer here in the city of Fitchburg, so he's got a nice long background with the city. And thanks for joining us, Ron, as well.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Next up, we can move on to our next agenda item. Agenda item 6B, referendum recap and revenue sources discussion with our administrator, Chad Brecklin. We'll just take a minute while he gets set up. And while we have a second, while Chad gets set up, Chad's going to email you, since we moved the, the committee of the whole meeting because of spring break in March. Chad's going to reach out and just make sure that there's a council meeting the day before. And so he's going to reach out just to make sure that we're going to have a quorum for that meeting. So check out that email and please respond to him.
It's Windows. It's Windows. Okay, good evening, everyone. As Alder Gerhardt mentioned, we're here to talk about referendum recap, but more largely to discuss revenue sources in the form of alternative revenue sources that the Common Council may wish to consider in light of the fact that the 2024 referendum we had on the November ballot did not pass. When we look at the slide here in regards to the referendum recap, we had a 47% of our community voted in favor of the referendum, 53% voted no. There was a difference of about just under 1,100 votes in total in favor of the no. City staff and the mayor met after the referendum to assess the outcome, take any notes and those sorts of things, pointers, lessons learned that could be utilized for a future referendum if the council elected to do a referendum in the future. Deadlines to make a 2025 ballot have passed. The only the only election in 2025 is the April general election. Of course, there is a statewide primary coming up in February, but ultimately those are the only elections that are happening this year. In the event the Common Council wished to consider a referendum for 2026, you can see on this slide that we have identified the dates in which the question would need to be provided to the Dane County Clerk. I won't go through those in detail, but you can see them here based upon the elections next year. Moving on to alternative revenue options.
If you recall, there was a presentation by our financial advising firm Ellers back in June of 2023 that identified some of the alternative revenue options. Those specifically identified were impact fees for government purposes, specifically though non-utility purposes, a streetlight user charge, a vehicle registration fee, a transportation utility, which we won't spend any time on this evening because it's no longer a legally viable option due to court challenges that were in court rulings, and then payment in lieu of taxes, also known as a pilot. The city does currently have a fire impact fee in place in regards to Ordinance 44-146. This is a fire impact fee, or this is an impact fee that is paid by new development projects. You can see the cost associated with this impact fee based upon the type of dwelling it is or building, using single-family residential as an example here to work through. That'd be the building type. The unit of measure is the dwelling unit, and then the fire impact fee for a single-family residential unit is $622. And then you can see additionally down below how else, what other building types there are, and then of course the unit of measure that could be utilized, just pointing out commercial, industrial, and industrial business park use are square footage versus the dwelling unit itself.
Quick clarifying question, this is a one-time fee.
This is a one-time fee paid as part of the development process. And this is impact fee that will actually be concluding probably within the next 24 months, 18 to 24 months, based upon the amount that's been collected and our requirements to then stop collecting the fee. We have talked a bit, I believe, about a police impact fee in Common Council or Committee of the Whole meetings in the past. This would be very similar to the fire impact fee. Both of those impact fees are used for construction-related purposes, not the operating costs associated with those buildings. So, for instance, the fire impact fee is being utilized to pay for the construction costs, basically the debt repayment for the 2 fire stations that were recently constructed. And if we were to implement a police impact fee, that would be utilized for the payment or repayment specifically of the construction for the new police services facility. As I pointed out, it can reduce the debt needed to complete a project, and which would also then reduce the property tax levy needed for both principal and interest payments. And it would require a needs assessment and public hearing, and we actually already have Ellers under contract, and they are currently assessing the police impact fee and what could potentially be requested or required from the city of Fitchburg. I do want to point out that there was a very recent court filing challenging the use of impact fees on debt service payments, so we will be paying attention to that court case and determine obviously how the court rules on that and whether or not there's any impact to our ability to potentially implement a police impact fee moving forward.
On the fire impact fee, you said that that's going to be ending in a couple of years. Can you explain that a little more clearly?
Yeah, it's my understanding, Jay, and I certainly will not profess to be an expert on impact fees. That's one of the reasons why we contract with Ellers on these sorts of matters, because of their experience in that area. But it's my understanding that when Ellers does the needs assessment, they take a look at what the impact of new development in particular is on the need for those facilities. So, for instance, when we look at the new police services facility, they will look at more than likely a percentage of the square footage of that facility that is due to new development that is anticipated in the city versus what has already been, what development may have caused the need for new space in the past. And then they identify how much to what the upper limit of what the impact fee can be collected to be utilized for the debt payments. And the city has the ability to ask for anything up to that upper limit. We can go lower if the city so chooses, but once that upper limit is achieved, then the impact fee has to be ended.
I see. So you can't really collect the impact fee on an ongoing basis, anticipating that you will need more fire infrastructure or that you will need more police infrastructure.
Correct.
So theoretically, you could have this several years, maybe 10, 20 years of properties that get built that are necessitating the increase in this infrastructure, but don't have to pay anything, and it's only after a certain point that they have to pay.
That does appear to be a possibility, yes.
That doesn't appear to make any sense.
I will not argue with you on that point.
So we don't know what the percentage of the police building could be covered by this at this juncture.
Correct. We do not know at this point in time, but I'm anticipating within the next couple of months, Ellers will have completed their needs assessment and will have some information on that.
Doesn't this also require a crystal ball, understanding how much new development there may be that will pay these impact fees?
Yes, it does to some degree, but also one of the factors that's utilized, for instance, with the police services facility is what is the estimated number of staff that are anticipated to be added over the next 5, 10, 15 years, which then obviously drives the size of what the facility looks like. So those are some factors that they take into consideration to help identify what the dollar amount is that this impact fee could potentially be.
Isn't that problematic, though? Because as we have been talking about, and one of the drivers of the referendum is that for where we are right now, we are way understaffed in the police department. And so it's not the new development that's driving the need for new staff. It's what we've already got that's driving the need for new staff.
So yes and no. So obviously the development we've already has driven some of the need for a new police services facility, clearly. But what is at the point in which that facility is being built, how much of that facility is also being planned for future growth? So, what Ellers is taking a look at is, okay, if right now the police department has 55 sworn staff and a dozen professional staff for a total of 67 staff. In 15 years, will they, if they have a total of 80 staff due to ongoing development from this point, that is factored into how they calculate what that impact fee can be. So it does involve some measure of crystal ball, to use your terminology, or forecasting or anticipating what the growth needs are for that facility beyond today.
But can we get back to the presentation? And we can circle back.
Okay.
Yeah. One more quick question.
All right. So the fact that we currently should have 67 or 68 sworn officers is not really factored into their calculation. It's just this is what we have now.
Correct.
Okay.
Moving on to the streetlight user charge that was discussed at the Committee of the Whole by Ellers as another alternative revenue option. This is a user charge to recover annual costs for electricity used to operate our street lighting system. It is a per unit billing charge, typically on a utility bill, but it could also be on a property tax bill. If we were to implement a streetlight user charge here in the city of Fitchburg, it is estimated that it would recover approximately $200,000 annually through this charge. This is largely tied to our actual and direct costs associated for the electricity to operate the system. State properties cannot be charged. However, tax-exempt properties can be charged a user fee. If the Common Council were interested in pursuing the streetlight user charge, we would also contract with our financial advisors, Ellers. They would be required to or contracted to complete a streetlight electric expenditure recovery user charge study, which is required by law in order to implement such a charge. Common Council would need to approve an ordinance creating such a recovery user charge. And then ultimately, we would also need to determine the logistics in collecting that charge. Specifically, do you want it placed on the utility bill, or would you prefer it placed on the property tax bill? Would there be different rates in and out of the urban service area? And then perhaps, are there any software or other process enhancements that might be necessary in order to implement such a charge? There could be other logistical considerations. These are just the initial ones that come to mind. If you're curious if anyone locally has implemented a streetlight user charge, our neighbors immediately to our south in the Village of Oregon have implemented such a charge. And I also believe that the Village of Marshall in eastern Dane County has also implemented the charge. Go ahead.
I kind of feel like we heard that there was a court case that said you can no longer do this, or am I thinking of a different charge?
So you are likely thinking about the transportation utility. So,
okay.
Yeah. Now, this does not mean that there won't be a future charge or court case on this particular charge. I mean, anything is certainly possible, as we see with the recent filing on the police impact fee. But to this point in time, we're not aware of any current or pending.
That's the charge that you mentioned in the beginning that you said wasn't legally feasible?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Another alternative revenue option is the vehicle registration fee. This is authorized under state statute 341.35 and trans 126. That is a fee that is collected whenever anyone registered a vehicle that is not exempt from the registration fee or the additional registration fee. It's collected by the state as auto owners register their vehicles. We've all seen this as it relates to Dane County collecting a vehicle registration fee in addition to the fee that is collected by the State Department of Transportation. When looking at potential implementation of a vehicle registration fee specific to the city of Fitchburg, the eligible vehicles within our city is estimated to be just over 25,000 vehicles. The state retains an administrative fee of 17 cents per vehicle application. That is their current amount, and of course it could be subject to change, but we're not aware of any pending considerations for the state to change that. The remaining collection from the Department of Transportation is remitted to the city. I have listed here at least annually, although I believe it is actually monthly that they send that to us. And then the fee proceeds must be utilized for transportation-related purposes. I did list the current cities who have implemented a vehicle registration fee in the state of Wisconsin here. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see the varying ranges of the fees. They go from anywhere, generally speaking, from $10 on the low end to $40 on the high end, and everywhere in between. These are the counties in the state that have implemented the vehicle registration fee, along with the amounts that they are charging. And then locally, Dane County, the city of Madison, the city of Sun Prairie, and the Village of Oregon have all implemented the registration fee. And you can see the amounts that each of those for local municipalities are charging. And then the highest fee currently in the state of Wisconsin is $40. There are a number of municipalities, as you probably noticed, despite the small print on the previous slide, that are at $40. The state does not limit what the fee is. It is set by the municipalities. If we were to pursue the implementation of a vehicle registration fee, the next steps would be to determine the amount to charge. Again, there are no restrictions on the amount, but generally you can see $20 to $40 is the most common range in which municipalities are placing their fee. We would need to establish the registration period, i.e. when does it become effective, enact an ordinance imposing the fee, and then notify the state of the new fee at least 90 days prior to the first day of the month in which the ordinance is effective. And then we would need to create a special separate revenue fund to track proceeds and expenditures. Go ahead.
2 questions. One, I might have missed it. How much per dollar or whatever would we be expected to generate annually for implementing this? And then 2, when you say transportation expenses, what's all included in that? Is that bus? Is that bike infrastructure? Is it roads? Is it sidewalks?
I'll get to your first question in the next slide. I've got a table that outlines some potential fee amounts and what that would equate to in estimated annual revenue. And I think we would certainly, I didn't have the opportunity to confirm specifically in state statute what we could potentially identify as transportation-related expenses, but clearly anything related to road and road maintenance, reconstruction, I believe that there's a good possibility that transit-related expenses could potentially be utilized, but certainly we'd want to confirm that. And I would need to check on bike paths, for instance, or multi-use paths and sidewalks to see if those are considered to be transportation-related expenses. Oftentimes what most municipalities do when they implement this registration fee is they take existing transportation money and reallocate it to other uses and replace that money with the amount that they are collecting via the registration fee.
So is this money that can be used for general operating expenditures or capital expenditures, or?
The registration fee money cannot be used for anything other than transportation-related expenses, but the reallocated money that we may be already placing on those transportation-related expenses, if the council elected to replace that money with the registration fee money, could be reallocated to any purpose. That's making
all right,
sense.
but the question I was asking is, let's say in our Board of Public Works we have 10 snowplow drivers. So we could theoretically use this money to fund their wages as an operating expense. I want to know if it's operating expenses or capital expenses.
I will confirm what the if they have a specific list of what those expenses are, or if it's just more general transportation related, and provide a response to the Common Council via email, just so that there's, I don't want to provide bad information on that at all. And like I say, I did not have the opportunity to fully get that list in advance of the presentation.
My guess would be, since this is an ongoing recurring expense, we can use it for operating expenses, whereas an impact fee is a one-time deal, and so that's why it's limited to capital.
So to Alder Maldonado's first question, here is a table that identifies what specific fee amounts could be with the estimated annual revenue listed in the right-hand column. This estimated annual revenue does take into consideration the 17-cent per vehicle registration fee charge that the state keeps. So this is what is estimated to come in as revenue annually based upon the dollar amount that would be set by the Common Council. And then the last slide I have before we go to any other questions and discussion and potential direction is the pilot, or payment in lieu of taxes. The important note in a pilot situation is that this is a voluntary payment that are made for buildings and related improvements exempt from property taxation to cover the cost of municipal services, and it's voluntary on the part of the property owner. Examples of these sorts of buildings or improvements would be things like not-for-profit hospitals, senior living facilities, community centers, those sorts of things that have filed the appropriate paperwork for a tax exemption from property taxes. The logistics of a pilot program certainly may outweigh any benefits. One of the large challenges is the variability of relying on that on an annual basis, since they are truly voluntary. An organization may be willing to contribute a pilot in 1 year, but the following year, for whatever reason, they may not. So there could be some challenges in particular on counting on that from a consistent revenue basis. So questions, further questions, discussion, if there's any direction that the Common Council would like to provide in regards to whether or not you would like staff to pursue additional information on one or more of the options that have been listed, or identify other options that could be out there if they exist, we certainly can do that. So,
start with Joe.
Yeah. Alder Jesser mentioned it to me like one-on-one, but I just want to ask you and say it publicly, how much in our referendum had we allocated for transportation-related expenses?
So I believe the dollar amount that was utilized for the referendum for the transit expenses was approximately $350,000. I'm just going through the list of staff that were requested, and I don't believe there were any transportation-related staff. Obviously, police, fire, HR, communications, and finance were the positions. And then there was the police facility operating costs, which obviously would not account for transportation-related. And then that last $500,000 was largely reserved for cost of living adjustments. So really about $350,000.
And I would say as a follow-up, just to clarify, the expansion of the BRT, the north-south BRT to City Hall was not an expense that was included in the referendum, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and that estimated cost at last time we spoke would be like a couple $100,000 per year, correct?
I would have to dig out my notes on this one, but I think you are generally in the ballpark that it was going to be roughly $200,000 to $300,000 in annual operating expenses. And I believe it was going to be roughly $1.5 to $2 million in capital expenditures in initial outlay there. And I will add that Madison Metro currently does not have a strong desire to go south of McKee Road with the BRT at this point in time.
What would it cost to expand just general bus service of the current route that goes down, I think it's the D, to go to our civic campus?
Yeah, so what we had looked at as part of the referendum was routes 65 and 75 to improve east-west connection. And that $350,000 increase in transit expenditures would allow both routes 65 and 75, I believe, to have, again, I could, you want to, Scott, kill my screen temporarily? Let me just, I think I can find this relatively easy. I want to make sure that I give the frequency of route. It was either 60 or 90 minutes, and I don't recall which one off the top of my head that it was. Scott, you able to?
But the key is that it would extend service on those lines to full day rather than peak only.
Correct.
Which would then open up paratransit to anyone within 3/4 of a mile of either of those lines.
And weekend service too.
Correct.
Less frequent weekend service, because right now there's no weekend service for either of those routes.
But under that arrangement, the D would still stop at McKee.
Route B.
Route B,
Yeah.
sorry, B. It would still stop at
Right now the endpoint is Cahill, Maine. It could extend Trevorton Pike, and McKee is basically where the endpoint of the BRT would be.
Okay.
There's a possibility of extending the B down there, and then having the 65 connect there
so
as
connect
well.
them.
So
Okay.
going to connect all the bus routes, and the 75 basically drops off right across the street on McKee.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have that information. I located it now. So that would give us this line here. That one. Line 11, row 11. Approximately $350,000 would equate to 45-minute service during the daytime, dropping to 90-minute service on the evenings and weekends. But it would be 7-day-a-week, all-day service, obviously at varying levels. And to Alder Gerhardt's point, if the 65 and 75 were expanded to that level of service, they would terminate at the southernmost stop of the B route on Fish and McKee, so that somebody could theoretically then kind of use that as a hub to go east or west within the city of Fitchburg, or ultimately north on the BRT.
But theoretically, the 65, since it goes through Swan Creek, could make a loop up here before meeting up with the 75 and the B, right?
It already does go by City Hall.
Oh, it does?
The 65 does. Yep, it actually stops right out here by the library.
Yeah, so the idea would be just that it could connect to the routes that are going downtown.
Correct.
Like for folks that are taking the B.
Exactly. And then the other thing that would come from an increase to all-day service on Route 65 and 75 is paratransit service within three-quarters of a mile of those routes. We currently have some measure of paratransit service along the B route on Fish Hatchery Road, and then a little bit associated with Jamestown, Belmar, Duns Marsh, and Northern Fish Hatchery.
I would say then, just kind of given all that, I would personally, without thinking it more in depth and discussing it more in depth, be in favor of the vehicle fee, at the very least to the amount to cover the proposed transportation costs that we put in the referendum. And I would also probably even go a little bit higher just to have a buffer in case those costs increase, or in case there's other things that we want to divert the other money in our budget toward. That would be my personal opinion. I think just given the discussions that council has had over the years, most of us are in agreement that this both paratransit and bus service needs to be expanded. So I would highly favor that, just given the amount of revenue that even a $20 or $30 fee would produce.
Sure. Okay. It's good to know.
Yeah.
I'd also be interested in exploring the vehicle registration fee further. Bill? Jay?
Definitely.
Yeah, we did talk about that previously. I mean, we just don't have that many revenue. When we were talking about the referendum, there was a chart that showed potentially how much we could expect to get from various things, including the registration fee. And I think there was, we talked about the transportation utility a bit more at length, but
yeah.
I don't know what we're going to do with the police and fire department. We've got a major problem. We've got two major problems. And right now, it seems to me those are bigger problems than the transit issue, which is also an issue. So I don't know where to head with these things. I just don't know.
I agree that those expenses are a lot bigger than our needed transportation costs. I'll say, just going back to the transportation thing, I also think from a ethical perspective, if we're a city that wants to do the things that we say in terms of combating climate change, having more walkable cities, having more transportation, doing better on the environment, just on principle, having drivers subsidize transit users, I think is a strong statement to say that we value these things. And also just looking at all the other municipalities that do this, many of them are urban areas, but there's even kind of rural municipalities and counties that do the same thing. So, I would be in favor of it.
Yeah, I think when you look at the revenue options that we currently have, or alternative revenue options that are currently have, and particularly the ones that are presented on, the two that probably have the best ability to be implemented based upon the outlay of time and capacity, would be the vehicle registration fee and the streetlight user charge. I think those two are probably the most productive out of the list here that's been presented today.
What's the potential for what we could raise through a streetlight user charge?
About 200,000.
Yeah, so
annually.
That's not enough.
Yeah, you'd have to have a relatively significant vehicle registration fee in order to equate to the 3.6 million that was
and
asked.
I don't think we can do that. I was just trying to find the email from the DOT that I just got, which tells me how much I have to pay by the end of March to register my vehicle, and it's not popping out at me here, but I think it was in the area of $130, and that doesn't even include this $40, which,
Correct.
you know, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. It's just one of those things. There was a pretty active, pretty vocal opposition to, and there were even people complaining just because of the 3.6% increase in in property taxes in the budget. I saw a lot of complaints about that after the referendum failed, so people are pretty unhappy right now.
Other thoughts? I mean, the police impact fee, we're already basically investigating that.
We are looking at that, yep.
We talked about that early on when we talked about funding sources. The vehicle fee is probably the thing I'm most interested in investigating at this point, the street user fee. There's less of a track record for it, and I don't know, one step at a time. Bill?
Yeah, so on the slide with the police impact fee, there was a little section of fine print at the bottom and said there was a recent court filing questioning the legality of this. Were they complaining about using it for interest payments in addition to the principal, or just debt service in general? Can you explain more about what that lawsuit is?
I cannot. I can get that information, though, and share it with the Common Council.
Other comments? Dave or Jim, do you want to weigh in? Jim, go ahead.
Just listening. I mean, I think it's a hard decision, with the limited revenue stream. I mean, I think the tax levy is going to be a problem, until that gets corrected.
Thanks, Jim. Is there anything else you're hoping to get out of this conversation?
No, I think if there aren't any other questions or comments, it seems as though the council is at least interested in learning more about the vehicle registration fee. What we can do is I can talk with Mayor Arata about potential timing of this, and I think ultimately we would certainly need to have a conversation about what dollar amount the Common Council would look to implement. What I can do is send this slide deck to you guys as well, in addition to the other information that I've promised Alders Allen and Jetzer, so you can at least in particular have that table with the amounts and to what those dollar amounts look like.
I think it's worth asking, but I don't know how to gauge it. I know as we explored the referendum, right, we gave a survey and we determined what people are willing to stomach. And if I recall, kind of what we decided on in the referendum was kind of predicted, I guess, by the consultants that it wouldn't win. I'm wondering if that data is available on all these municipalities that have implemented these fees on, I guess, what the public appetite is to pay them. And I don't know if, they've done surveys or if there's been surveys that have been done kind of statewide or nationally on these types of things. Like, what is the stomachable amount to charge people before they start, bringing their pitchforks?
Sure. I'm not aware of a municipality that has done any sort of survey of their residents before implementing the fee. I know the Village of Oregon and the City of Sun Prairie specifically did not do any sort of survey to determine what their communities might be tolerant of. And ultimately, I think that is probably a call for the Common Council as to what you believe your constituents are going to be tolerant of, and obviously trying to balance that with the revenue needs of the city.
Great. Seeing no other comments or questions, I think we can move on to announcements. Our next committee of the whole meeting will be February 26th, 2025. Anything else to add, Chad?
No, you had already mentioned folks should also look for an email about the March council meeting to determine quorum. And then you will also, actually I'll mention, be seeing an email forthcoming from Adam Sayre about meeting start times. We're going to survey the Common Council to determine if you have an interest in moving Common Council meetings and our Committee of the Whole meetings start times from the traditional 7:30 and 7 p.m. So there will be a few options there that you guys can weigh in on.
Great. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. We are adjourned at 8:15 p.m. Thank you.